And good afternoon. This is Bruce Pearson at the Jersey Talk Radio Studios in Flemington, New Jersey. We're at the Flemington Car and Truck Country Broadcast Center. I'm here with David White, and tonight's program is going to be very interesting. It's a professional look at performance and the dynamics in family-owned businesses and some other issues. So without further ado, I want to introduce our host for this evening's program, David White. Take it away, David.
Good evening, Bruce. Yeah, tonight what I'd like to do is spend some time talking about the whole issue of giving performance feedback to employees, because everyone is familiar with it, everyone wants it, and yet it doesn't happen anywhere nearly as often as it should happen. And I'd also like to take calls tonight, so I'd encourage people to call in at any time, and the number is 908-347-7793. And to get started and get maybe people thinking, is I've got two interesting questions for the audience as a whole. The first is what I call somewhat of a feedback paradox. You talk to employees and they say that they want feedback, but they never get it. And then you talk to managers and they say, oh, I'm always giving my people feedback. So somewhere there's a disconnect there, and I'd like to get the audience's thought as to why that disconnect exists. I have my own theories, but I'd like to hear from some people in terms of why they think that happens. The other thing that I think is interesting about feedback is most people would agree that it's easier to give positive feedback than it is to give negative or constructive feedback. And yet, when you talk about what happens in businesses, most people also recognize that negative feedback is much more prevalent than positive feedback. So I'd like to get some people's thoughts about that issues too.
Okay. We're bringing that number up here, but maybe you can give that number out again.
Sure.
And then we're going to go into some of your website stuff and talk about the feedback issue. And so I've had some perspectives on that. I want to ask you some questions that maybe the audience would.
Sure, good. The number again for calls is 908-347-7793.
Okay. And, of course, you can, call in and we'll try to get you online as quick as possible. All right, so when you're talking about feedback, you're talking about feedback coming from a supervisor, a boss, an owner, an employer. Let's break it into informal feedback on a regular basis,
mm-hmm.
and then the formal sit-down.
Let's call it informal. The formal sit-down is a different, that's kind of the performance review thing, and that's a whole nother animal, so to speak. But let's just talk about in the normal course of the workday, something happens.
Okay.
And it's either a good thing or not a good thing.
Not so good a thing.
Right?
Right.
And if it's a good thing, if you're the manager, you want the person to know that so they do it again. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they do more of it.
And what's the common approach, if you will? What's the industry standard? Is it acceptable to give someone feedback ad hoc, or are you better off not going down that road?
No, it needs to be given ad hoc. I mean, it doesn't happen anywhere nearly enough. And too many times.
Well, that was my point.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem, in my experience, that
it's real common.
No, but the antithesis of that, the opposite side, is extremely rapid and prevalent. If you make an error, you know what?
Well, that goes to
the wrath of God's on you instantly.
Well, that goes to my point about even though positive feedback is easier to give, negative feedback is still more prevalent, and that's sort of counterintuitive. You would think that the easier thing to do would be the thing that happens more often.
But doesn't that stem from and I may be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, but does that stem from the management point of view that if you give someone too much positive feedback, that they're going to want to raise, that they're going to. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had managers say that to me.
Yeah.
If I keep telling you how good you're doing, then you're going to want more money, or you're going to get a big head, or you're going to start reading your own press releases. I think that is so silly and so sophomoric.
You're being kind. It's stupid.
Well, it's counterproductive. I mean, I've often said, what does it cost an employer to give somebody an attaboy?
Yeah, exactly.
But if you give somebody, and we can talk about these issues because you and I have talked about these on a number of occasions.
Right.
I don't, for the life of me, understand my perception after working in media and training and so forth and public relations with a lot of Fortune 100 companies, where this mindset comes from that you motivate people but with a hammer in your hand rather than building team, building camaraderie, building a good feeling about the company. And I only contrast what I know from Asian companies, from Japanese companies, from Honda, from Sony, from Daimler-Benz, from companies that really foster a teamwork, a team effort. The Korean companies, Hyundai, and.
But let's go back to the question that you're raising, though, is why the more negative than positive? And my theory, okay. Mm-hmm. My theory is that it stems from fundamentally what the manager's job is, because the manager's job is to get results through people in a relatively stable situation. And when everything is going smoothly, that's fine. It's when things start to go wrong that the manager has to step in, right?
Yep, agreed.
So naturally, the focus is on watching for things that go wrong and correcting them.
So the whole perspective is kind of skewed. It's not about building a better team. It's about looking for, watching for errors and jumping on them quickly.
Correcting errors, exactly.
Okay.
Right. Now, I think that's part of it. I think that's a large part of it, at least. And it's just there's some basic rules, and a lot of people know these rules. I mean, first of all, you never want to give negative feedback in public. All right, because all you're going to do is increase the person's defensiveness. But
and resentfulness too. I mean, I think that
sure. Well, you get a space-saving reaction.
Right.
It's just like backing a person into a corner and they come out fighting.
Right.
But where you talked before about an attaboy, and an attaboy is fine. I mean, it's nice, but it's not really anything I can do. It's not actionable. I can't do anything with it because I don't know really what was good about what I did. All I need to know was I did something good, but I'm not really sure what it was.
So it wasn't qualified. It wasn't specific.
It has to be effective. It really needs to be specific. It needs to be, hey, that was a great job. The report that you wrote was really, really thorough.
Yeah, and I don't think that's any harder than saying you did a great job today. When I was on that team with RCA Americon working on the space shuttle, I mean, on a regular basis, we was like, we jumped over one more hurdle today. We're one step closer to getting this thing put together.
Well, it does take a little more thought, though. It's easy to say, hey, great job.
Right.
But that's easier than to say, why was it great, to describe it. And that's the other thing that's really important. So it needs to be specific, and it needs to be actionable. And in other words, I'm 5'6". There's no point in telling me that I should be taller. That kind of feedback is not something I can do a lot about.
It's not very helpful.
Yeah, not very helpful at all. And the only two things that you should be talking to the person about when you're talking about their performance is either their behavior or the results that they're accomplishing. Anything else is out of bounds. So if you keep that in mind, observe behavior or results, those are the two things that you as a manager can effectively and legitimately talk to a person about.
Okay.
So right there, put some boundaries around it. You don't want to go into attitude. You don't want to go into emotions. It needs to be observable behavior or results. And observable behavior, by the way, includes what a person says, because that's a form of behavior.
Of course it is.
So this business of action versus words, No.
It doesn't really exist.
No, it really doesn't.
All right. So, what is the status quo in your observation of many businesses, and qualify them by small, local, family, medium, whatever constraints you have to put on this snapshot? What's American business do in your estimation on these areas of?
Well, they don't give people effective feedback. People are not getting effective feedback. Managers think they're giving it, but most of the time what they're giving is instructions, and they think that qualifies as feedback. And those are two different animals. They really are two different animals. So
and what are the results of that?
Well, the results of that is that you're not getting as good performance from people. Most people, I honestly believe, want to do a good job until they get the soul sucked out of them. Right.
Right.
and
Can't disagree with that.
Right. I mean, who doesn't enter a company wanting to do a good job? Most people do. But, the absence of feedback in terms of what am I doing well, what could I do better, right? Like I said, people always say they want it and they don't get it. And the managers are always saying, but I give it to them all the time. So what's going on? And what's going on is the fact that it's not usually feedback. It's usually more instructions. And that's a different animal. So, and the people take
Well, draw that distinction, will you? Because I don't know that it's easy for people just hearing that the first time to understand
the difference between feedback and instructions.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it would be illustrative to be able to
Sure.
to just give us some examples of that.
The most common metaphor for feedback is that of a thermostat. In other words, if the temperature is too low, the thermostat will sense it and make it go up. That's feedback. It gives feedback to the system, okay, to increase the temperature. So feedback is based on something that has happened in the past that either you want to see continued or discontinued or changed in some way.
Okay.
All right. So, and it's based on either performance or it's based on either behavior. The person did something,
right,
which is probably the most common form, or it is the most that happens most often, or it's based on results. Now, results are a little trickier because you can make the argument that as adults we should be in charge, we should be in command of our own behavior. So, yeah, I know. Like I said, I qualified it. You can make the argument. Right. But results, sometimes the results are outside the control of the person.
Well, I think many times they are in regular life as well as in a job setting.
Yeah, it's commonly known as
above my pay grade.
Yeah, stuff happens, like
right.
Like a transformer blowing out.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So, that has to play into how the feedback is given. But instructions are simply said, okay, we need to do this, and here's what I want you to do. Now, what's interesting is in some ways instructions are more future-oriented than feedback, and that's one of the things that makes feedback difficult and sometimes ineffective is that if you're just talking to the person about the past, this is what happened, here's what I observed, this is what the impact was, right? You never get around to talking about what should be in the future instead.
But are we splitting hairs to say that, feedback or instructions on remedial instructions are by their definition, they're feedback?
Well, remedial, okay, which means that you're trying to change something.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm just trying to understand a clear distinction between what people are doing in the workplace and what they ought to be doing if they want to motivate people.
Right. Well, that's an interesting point because I think in some ways, I don't know if I'd call it remedial, but I think that can be very effective. The whole idea of constructive feedback is that it unfreezes the behavior of the individual. We fall into habits. This is how we do things, and we get set in patterns. And by giving what's called constructive feedback, hopefully you're going to you're going to unfreeze that pattern and get the person to think about doing it a different way. That's the fundamental idea. All right. Positive feedback, if it's given specifically, is just a way of saying, hey, what you did was good. That behavior, that report that you wrote, or the way you conducted that interview was really thorough. And you want to keep it descriptive. You want to keep it descriptive in both cases. And that's something that managers really struggle with, because the tendency is to be judgmental, to say, oh, that was really good. That's a judgment. It's not a description. Right? And as soon as you go into judgmental mode, that creates distance between people. As soon as I start to become a judge of your behavior, either positive or negative, but particularly negative, but in either case, that actually creates distance between people. So you want to keep it descriptive in terms of, this is the behavior that I saw. This is what I observed. I saw you lingering back there and talking about such and such, and this is what I heard you say. Now let's talk about that.
Okay, let me give you a scenario that
Sure.
in a unique situation I find myself in many times. This is not at all uncommon.
Okay.
It is not comfortable, and I think it does lead. It does have the ability to lead into the whole feedback loop or lack of feedback.
Okay.
And unfortunately, there's, just without going into a lot of detail, the situation that a lot of people find themselves in today in the workplace, at least in the United States, is their temporary contract, freelance, per diem, whatever.
Yes, free agent economy.
And guess what? The remedy of any, perceived or direct or viable lack of performance on any given day results in, guess what, find another client. And the interesting thing, there is, in many cases, more than I'd like to see in my experience in the last several years, there's no briefing, no training, no orientation, no nothing, to use bad English, and there's really no feedback.
No.
It's you just disappear. So all those elements that in a traditional, you got a 30-second brief to run a $6 million vehicle or an operation or a studio or whatever, and it's instant learn, and if you don't comply, oh, this guy's no good, he screwed up, and out the door he goes. It's just beyond belief. It's a very tough environment to work in.
Yeah, well, it's also a very expensive way to operate a business.
And yet, I can give you specific after client after company, and I'm talking about from Fortune 100s, Fortune 50 companies, and that's the way they operate. They just drop people in the slot, and if they screw up, let's find another one, and we'll just churn through people. Meanwhile, what's the product look like that's going out the door?
Well, that's what
and it boggles the mind.
Yeah, it's
that
if you look at the cost of turnover, and I mean they've studied that forever, you're going to get figures that range from whatever the person's annual salary is, the cost of turnover when that person leaves is going to be anywhere from 2 to 3 times their annual salary. If people knew that, they'd be a little more careful.
And yet I see demonstrably time after time after time where they'd rather pick somebody that's inappropriate because they can save a couple bucks. They get a young person who'll work cheaper. They're no good. They drop them out and they roll the dice again for another 6 months to put somebody in there. It's so counterintuitive.
Well, it's a very expensive way of operating. It's demoralizing to the whole workforce.
Sure.
I mean, and I don't want to get into the whole issue of employee engagement tonight because that's a bigger issue. But they've done lots of studies that where the difference between companies where the employees are highly engaged versus they're not highly engaged is huge. It's huge. I mean,
well, I think the germane issue that I wanted to bring about is that kind of mentality or culture, if you will, to put it in business terms, that type of culture totally takes this discussion and throws it out the door because there is no feedback.
No.
You just don't get invited back to the table.
Well, that's a form of feedback. Don't come back tomorrow. Thanks very much.
You just don't hear from them again.
Yeah, but you know, it's hugely costly, and I don't know why that. I think I know to some degree that why that happens is because it's easier to do things that way. That's easy.
Well, I think a lot of it, in my observation, has to do with an insecurity that the people doing the hiring or the people in middle management or the people that interface with the new hires are so insecure they don't want anybody that could be construed in their mind as being a threat. Is that is that way out of line or?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know there's a certain.
What's your observation? You see it as a professional that looks at these issues. I'm just a casual observer in many cases.
I think that's to say that's a normal operating model is a little bit of
exaggeration.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit.
Well,
of
that's
an
good. That's good to hear. I mean, I'm glad to hear that. I'm not a
Yeah.
gloom and doomer by any means.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that, and it's going to happen more often because of the nature of of our economy.
Why is that? Why do you say that?
Well, because things are changing so quickly.
And there's a call, so
Okay.
let's see what we got here. Go ahead and open that up. Okay.
Dave White.
Hi. This is Linda from Westfield. I was just going to make a comment.
Sure.
The question that I had was that I think a lot of managers only think about doing reviews or doing positive or negative feedback, when it comes time to do reviews, and most people when they go into a job assume that you're going to do well, so managers don't bother giving positive feedback because they expect everybody to do a good job.
The managers expect everyone to do a good job?
Yeah, when they come into the job itself.
Well, I don't, whether they expect it or not, they certainly hope it that the employees are going to do a good job.
Right.
But the thing is, if a person exerts themselves and does do a good job, and it's ignored, then that detracts from their motivation to want to continue to do a good job, and that's part of the reason why you see low engagement among employees.
Well, the other thing that happened to me was that one time, as a manager, my boss gave me little square cards to hand out to my employees to let them know they did a good job. And at the time, it was, little like, "You're a star," or "Great job," with an exclamation. Right. And that's not what I would consider to be valid positive feedback.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that you did to kids when they were in kindergarten.
Really, that's
Right.
It's a little patronizing, I would say.
And I don't think there's enough training.
There isn't enough training, and that's part of the reason why managers don't give feedback, because they're not comfortable doing it because they don't know how to do it. So
Right.
that is definitely part of the issue.
What type of business are you in? What industry do you work in, if you don't
In
mind?
the medical field.
Do you think that and it depends, there's a million variations there, and you don't have to go into any further detail, but do you think that the nature of the clientele, the stress involved, the ramifications of errors, do you think that enhances or detracts from the willingness or the ability or the status quo of giving positive feedback or any feedback in general?
I think it affects the amount of time that you have to
Good point.
make a decision to provide that feedback. Do you have enough time to really put it all together and give it in a constructive manner? Or, if there is an error that's significant, it has to be changed right away. But to just hand out little cards to say, "Great job," when everybody's been working really hard,
That's a little silly.
there's got to be a better way of either delegating time or being able to approach people to make them feel that they are a part of a team and that they are able to be appreciated for what they do.
Well, you know, the rule of thumb is if you're going to give positive feedbacks, you want to do it publicly, and negative feedback you do privately. You know, it doesn't. If you get into the mindset of I'm going to look for things to tell people they did well, all right, as opposed to what the most common mindset is, oh, if somebody makes an error, I have to correct them, right? Because
Right.
you're the manager, you're held accountable for it, and it's the errors that people see, and that's what they remember. But if you can get into the mindset of, hey, I'm going to, I know of one trick. There was a trick where people would put 10 pennies in their pocket. And they would say, okay, by the end of the day, those 10 pennies are going to be in the other pocket because I will have told people 10 things that they did well. But they had to make, they had to resort to that to remind themselves to do it.
So it was a concerted effort to do that.
Right. But any change takes a concerted effort, so that's fine, But neither do you want to manufacture praise. It's got to be legitimate.
Well, that brings up another point. Did you, beyond the flashcards that were being handed out, did you have any formal recognition program in that organization where people were acknowledged in a more formal way, or is it just handing out the gold stars?
No, that's what we were given, and it just seemed like most of the training we got was when we were trying to build a case for dismissing somebody.
Oh, that's interesting.
Here's how to get
What?
So it wasn't very helpful.
A lack of cards meant you were in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have to keep them in an envelope for your performance review and say, "Well, I got 31 cards here, and they had 26."
Really? Yeah. That's an interesting scenario. My own preference, and I don't know if this is if I can generalize about this or it's just my values, but rather than recognition, I always liked appreciation more than recognition, because that made me that resonated with me better when someone thanked me for something I had done because it was good. Obviously, they weren't thanking me when it wasn't good, but that's different than saying, nice job, or you did that well, or something like that. But that was just me. I don't know if I can say that's true for most people. I think it is to some degree, but it's hard to generalize, and you have to be careful because your values don't necessarily correspond to what everyone else wants.
Right.
Well, let me ask you, what obviously you had time to think about this when it was happening, and perhaps now and in the subsequent time frame, but what would you suggest would have been a better way to deal with this issue in that organization?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I tend to have small meetings where we talk about some of the goals that we're trying to accomplish in the office. I try and point out when those plans, involve people in making those plans, and then in giving sort of feedback along the way as to how we're progressing and what we're accomplishing. So I thank them every day when they leave, and even the docs that I work for are very appreciative. So I think it sort of flows down from there. But it's not always easy in this environment.
Well, you make an interesting point about plans, though, and that's one of the beauties of plans, is if you do have plans in place, you don't have to give feedback to the person. The plan itself gives them feedback because they can see where they stand against the plan, and they don't have to wait for someone to come to tell them you're on course or you're off course. And the best form of feedback, without question, is feedback that is derived directly from the behavior itself. That's why people like sports. You hit a lousy golf shot, you know it right away. If you go bowling, imagine if you went bowling and they had a sheet over the pins, in front of the pins, and you couldn't see how many you knocked down. Do you think many people would be interested in go bowling? Someone had to tell you, you knocked 5 pins down? No, it's the ability to see the instant feedback tells you whether it was a good or a bad toss, right? So That's, without question, the most effective feedback. So if you have plans, people can see it, and all you can say is, "Okay, hey, we're on course. You're on plan. That's great. Let's keep going." Which in essence says, keep doing what you're doing because what you're doing is a good thing, right?
Right. And I also ask the question of them a lot in terms of, you know, does everybody get what we're trying to do? You know, am I missing people? So instead of waiting for them to make an error, screw up, you know, and when we get into trouble, you know, doing that check along the way,
Mm-hmm.
and it keeps them involved, and it helps keep the lines of communication open, because we've had a lot of changes,
Sure.
a lot of you know, going into different systems recent in the last couple of years. So
Right.
we get into one system and then have to change and go into a new one, and that's very disruptive in terms of the operations of the practice.
Yeah.
And so
You're
yeah.
actually going into overall motivational issues as opposed to just the
Oh,
feedback
okay.
the
Yep.
feedback issue. I mean, you're involving your people, you're getting them to buy in, you're giving you're getting their input and getting their opinions, which will give them some sense of ownership, and those are all great things. It's at the little outside the scope of the feedback issue, which is fine, but there's no question that feedback impacts people's motivation, because if I'm doing positive things, there's no guarantee I'm going to continue to do them. I mean, without some sense of some acknowledgement that yes. Hey, why should I? Other than my own standards or my own sense of self or my own sense of accomplishment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
like I said, we live in an environment today which, 70% of the people in the employees in the United States are not engaged in their work, which means that they're going through the motions. Put in my time, 9 to 5.
Well, it's an insidious downward spiral when you feel that the employer doesn't really give a damn about you in the long term or the short term beyond what you're doing right now. And would you...
You're also going to do the minimum.
Exactly. You do your 8 and skate. I mean, you know what? Because there's no incentive to take the initiative, to go the extra distance. That is such a pervasive negative impact on an organization. Let me ask you, in the health field, what percentage of devaluation of performance would you assign to your response or other employees' response to handing out the flashcards in lieu of actually some substantive communication that you guys were doing a good job? What was the gold star worth? And to have a 10% diminishment in the effectiveness, or 20%, or was it a real deal killer? Did it knock the wind out of your sails in your mind?
It was a directive for me to do it. I thought it was ridiculous, so I opened it up to my staff and said, "Okay, who wants a gold?" I basically
sought their input.
I didn't feel that it was going to be productive at all, so I sort of turned it into a joke, quite frankly.
And it's almost insulting to take
okay,
adults.
I got to give a gold star out. So
Okay.
who wants a gold star for today?
Yeah.
And here's a great job. And they were like packing them to their monitors. It was sort of it was a joke, and it was taken that way. But I certainly I did what I was directed to do, but it
Sure.
was a ridiculous directive.
It's almost insulting to professional people
Yeah,
to
Like
do
I
that.
said, patronizing.
It really is.
Yeah.
Give somebody a $50 gift card to Applebee's, and at least they could go out and have a good time on it. I mean, there's some value in it. The silly gold star.
Well, I mean, give them some.
That went out in 4th grade.
Yeah, I mean, and I, I'm not real big on monetary awards. The research shows that it really doesn't do that much good. But what it can be is a symbol of appreciation, and the fact that we appreciate what you've done. And it doesn't have to be a whole lot of money.
No. It's the principle behind it. And the principle behind it is you acknowledge somebody's professionalism and their willingness to do their job without having to have, a gun to their head. And I think that today, even that amount of pulling in the same direction I've observed it a lot. I think it's not all that common. I see, and you and I have had this discussion, and I may be completely wrong. And caller, you can agree or disagree. There's far more pervasive an attitude of, we've got 200 applications in the drawer. You know what? Take it or leave it, because I can find somebody to replace you in a nanosecond. So,
I think it's out there, absolutely.
Yeah, but now here's the converse to that. Yeah, in our economy today, having gone through the recession that we went through and the impact that that had on the labor market, and the labor market's come back a long ways, but it's not completely there. People have a very long memory, and they know when they've been taken advantage of. And when the labor market eventually turns, and I've used this expression before, the best swimmers are the first rats to leave the ship. And the people who feel that they've been taken advantage of, but they're trapped because there is no alternative, that starts to change. They will be gone.
yeah, and you and I have had that discussion. I think there's no doubt. This is why I don't understand.
It's short-sighted.
The self-destructive nature of these policies and cultures. I don't. Look, there's got to be a countervening other side
Bruce,
of the coin.
That's got to be a topic. That is such a huge topic.
I'm sorry.
I mean, we could spend the entire rest of the month or the year talking about what that is. But a lot of it has to do with a very short-sighted thing, very short-term.
But isn't that most of American businesses' focus is the next quarter, the next? I mean, look at the stock market. It's like, we got to pump up the stock prices for the next the next quarterly.
That's question. That's
and the hell with what happens after that. We're going to be out of this business, but we'll pump it up and jack it up for the next one.
Exactly. That's part of it. But it's funny. You can see companies that are in it for the long term, and they operate differently. They really do operate differently. They don't operate with a revolving door. All right.
And I'm not trying to put you in a spot, but can you give the listeners and the viewers some examples of companies that you feel exhibit those higher ideals for the long haul in your observation or your experience directly? No, or I mean, you're a professional at it, so it's easier for me if you illustrate it with some examples.
Okay, but I don't want to name names that per se.
Okay. Well, I think in a positive way, that's you're giving them a plug. You're not.
Yeah, but yeah.
All right, I'm not trying to put you on a spot. Let me ask you in healthcare, and having worked in healthcare for a portion of my life, but caller, how important is it to build teamwork in your line of work or your experience?
Oh, it's critical, actually. Without teamwork, we had a situation today where, the front desk was checking somebody in. Somebody collapsed outside our office, couldn't breathe. We had patients waiting to see doctors. We had we were calling 911 out front. I had a team that knew to bring oxygen. Everybody in the office knew exactly what they had to do right when that situation happened. That can happen in our office with a patient in our office. Everybody has a job, and they all have to work together in order to make it right. So I think, we're not a huge hospital or anything like that, but if you have people that are not team-oriented in this scenario, it's not going to work. And everything has to coordinate so tightly, medications and treatments and patient care and confidentiality, and everything has to flow. And if you're not on your game and you're not aware of what's going on, everybody in their own job of what they're doing, it all falls apart, and it has significant consequences.
And what if I may, what impact, how destructive is it when these silly, superfluous, and I'm putting words in your mouth, I don't mean to, but these window dressing attaboy, things, does that hurt morale, or does, the team look beyond that and say, well, that's silly?
Well, I wouldn't normally do it. And thankfully I'm not in a position anymore where I'm going to have to do something like that. But
Different organization.
as an organization, because I don't have the same situation anymore in our company. But it's, I think that to the extent everybody's aware, if I seriously went around and did that, and I was very serious about it, I would be a laughingstock in the office, and I would not be able to manage my team.
You'd lose the respect of the people that work for you.
Absolutely. I mean, there was no way I was going to do that.
Yeah. I mean, adults don't like to be treated like 6-year-olds.
Yeah, it's like our manager's Pee Wee Herman now. What is that all about?
And that's one of the problems with the whole performance review process.
Well, I know that's a sore spot with you.
Oh, it's a huge sore spot because I've been working on it my entire career. And I kept trying to make it work and trying different things, and nothing really was satisfactory as far as I was concerned that made it work. And I suddenly realized, I said, now there's something fundamentally wrong. And what's wrong is the delivery of an evaluation. Why do I have to tell you, your performance was a 3 on such and such? Okay. What in God,
Well,
how does that take you back? It takes you back to 5th grade.
Well, and I know that, and our caller can chime in on this and weigh in, but as from the employee standpoint,
right?
If there is no acknowledgement, if you are doing far more than your fair share. And let's go back to what the trends are. We continually improve productivity in this country by laying people off and letting the remaining soldiers have to pick up the weight. Now, that's a broad brush. I know that's not but
I know there's an element
but
of truth.
the trench warfare attitude is, geez, they just let John go. If I stick my head above the trench and say, hey, I can't do 3 people's work, I'm going to be the next one that gets on the bus. So you see that, and I'm sure you see cutbacks in healthcare, caller, and you can agree or disagree.
Time.
Okay,
yeah, all the time.
So the workload increases. So if nobody's giving you a performance review or a positive reinforcement, okay, how do you toot your own horn and say, wait a minute,
Whoa. You're making the assumption that if you stop...
I'm probably making a lot of bad assumptions.
If you're making the assumption that if you stop giving an evaluation, on a 5-point scale, you did your performance was a 4, that you can't talk to the person about what their performance was. That I can't sit down with you at the end of the year and say, I need to talk with you about a couple of different things.
No, what I was suggesting is, what's the mechanism where I can say, hello, remember me? Remember there used to be 3 guys in this unit, now there's 2, and by the way, the workload has increased 50 patients a month or something. I mean, that in the healthcare, that's not uncommon.
Well, there may or may not be. That's one of the things that you probably don't have a whole lot of control about.
No, but here's my point. When you get people on the downhill side of an attitude, they take it out in trade, and the employer doesn't even realize it. You know what? The brain I'll kick my mind into neutral and ride along.
There's payback.
Exactly.
Right. But what I prefer, if you're going to do something like that, as opposed to the pay for performance thing, your evaluation was how many points, and this results in such and such an increase.
Right, which
and half the time the average
silly.
The average increase is 2%. So the star performer gets 2.5%, and everyone else gets 2%. Yeah, give me a break, okay? What's much more impactful is to take that person who's doing the above and beyond, and hit them with a spot bonus and say, hey, we know how hard you're working. We see the results you're producing. The work you've been doing, the quality has been great, and we want you to know that we see it and we appreciate it. And here's something tangible as a show of our appreciation.
Caller, does that happen in your organization?
Doesn't happen in many organizations.
I doubt it.
It doesn't happen often, but it did happen to me over the holidays. So
wow, good for you! Congratulations. Well, that's good. It makes you feel good, and it really, anybody that's worth their salt, it reinvigorates them to. They will. I mean, you know what? I think it does. It's like, wow.
Well, it's just like, okay, I'm doing above and beyond, and people recognize it.
Yep.
Okay, and I'm not doing it for the recognition, but it's nice that it's there.
I fully agree with that.
Right.
I don't know that anybody on the employee side of the ledger would have a problem with saying, I'm never going to argue with you for saying something nice about what I'm doing, especially if I'm really killing myself to pull my weight.
Well, and especially getting back to the feedback, if you tell me why I got that, why? What did I do that was good? The best feedback you could get from any kind of a review would be, what you're doing is great. I just want you to continue to do what you're doing, and I will be a very, very happy person.
That's
right?
That's easy to assimilate,
right?
I think.
And hopefully talk about, and when I say continue what you're doing, let me give you some examples of what it is that you're doing that I want to see you continue to do or do more of.
Right.
Okay, so now I got even a clearer idea of what it is that you thought.
It doesn't
was
seem
good.
like it's that difficult
It's
of a
not.
formula.
It's
But
not.
let me say this,
But
and
it does
caller,
take
I want to thank you for calling in, but we're coming up to the end of the hour here,
Yeah.
so thank you for taking the time to share your experience, because it does lend a little bit of in the real world
Yeah,
where
it's
the rubber
interesting.
hits the road, and that
thanks very
healthcare.
much.
Healthcare is an increasingly tough area. It's not going to get any better. The demands are going to be worse. The money's going to be less. So, we certainly appreciate that call, David.
Yeah.
I'm going to put your website up, and I want you to tell people how they can get in touch with you if they'd like to talk to you, and what you can do for them if they are interested or have some needs. So, let's go ahead and let you tell people how to avail themselves of your services here.
Okay. So you want the
everything,
the
all
web
the
address?
contact information, what you do, what you provide, what your focus is.
I do performance consulting. I work with companies of all sizes because I really enjoy what I do, and I don't want to stop doing anything. So for the very large companies, as an example, you are seeing some slight movement away from the traditional performance review process. And I've got a very different process that I'm looking for opportunities to pilot it at large companies. Other companies, more mid-sized companies, maybe family-owned or not, there I focus more on talent management. But for me, it's always about change, and it's about the people side of the organization. Mm-hmm. And what I'm trying to help companies do is create a competitive advantage by the way they manage their people. And for talent management, the question is, do you have the right people? Do they have the skills and knowledge that you need now and in the future? Because the future is coming quicker than ever. And then the second question is, and if you do have the right people, what's the level of engagement? Because
the website and the phone number.
Okay. Website, www.Performance Leadership Systems.
And that's number, up there now?
Yeah, 908-347-7793. And then the last thing real quickly is I also have a background in family therapy, so I enjoy working with family-owned companies because they have a whole different level of complexity if there's more than one family member.
And that's a lot of businesses. A lot of small businesses are intergenerational or cross-generational in the same generation of brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts.
Most family-owned businesses don't make it to the third generation.
Wow.
That's a statistic.
And what do you see in your crystal ball based on, do you think that this oil price drop, the market,
that's
in your wheelhouse, where do you see that going?
That's above my pay grade, Richard. I mean, the Chinese economy, the oil prices. The oil prices has actually been a good thing in terms of helping some manufacturing come back into the U.S., but it has such an impact on the rest of the economy.
Absolutely.
And I don't pretend to understand fully what that is. I'm trying to focus on things I can influence.
I'm with you.
And oil prices is not one of them.
Well, we're going to be back next week, in 2 weeks with you, actually, in 2 weeks. And thank you, and we hope some of the folks have enjoyed the program and learned a little bit, and maybe they'll reflect if they are in a position to do evaluations on some positive feedback that makes some sense.
Well, and just learn how to give even the constructive feedback.
Thank you much for being with us, David White. And you're on Jersey Talk Radio, and we'll see you in 2 weeks, and thanks.
Thanks, Bruce.